Hey guys, tonight we travel back to the early 14th century, a world just on the brink of disaster. You're standing at the edge of a misty European forest. Damp wind slides through the tangled trees, carrying the sour scent of rot and wet hay. Your boots squish in the mud as you approach a village, if you can even call it that. The cottages are sagging their straw roofs, leaking like sieves. Thin cows shuffle in circles, ribs poking out like jagged bones beneath their slick hides. In the distance, you hear the low, eerie creak of a cartwheel stuck in the mire. It hasn't rained in days, but the ground never dries. The sky is a smothering gray sheet. And the people, they look like shadows of humans. Hollow cheeks, glassy stares. Some don't even bother with greetings anymore. This is the world of the Great Famine of 1315, and you probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, drop your location and the local time. In the comments, I love seeing where and when you're listening from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You hadn't eaten in 2 days, and you're used to hunger. You've felt the gnawing twist in your gut before, but now it's different. It's not just your house, it's not just your neighbors, it's your entire village. The miller has no grain, the baker's oven hasn't been lit in a week, the Lord's pantry is locked. Even the mice have started to vanish. And it all started with the rain. You remember it well. The spring of 1315 began with hope. You turned the soil with aching hands, your fingers rough and packed with dirt, planting seeds you'd saved from the previous year's harvest. The sun peeped through the clouds just long enough to warm the backs of your legs. You said a quiet prayer like always, and you waited. Then the rain came. It didn't stop. For weeks. The rivers swelled and spilled into your fields. The oats were drowned. The barley melted into sludge. The wheat never stood a chance. The village paths turned to sucking pits of muck. Carts broke axles. Horses refused to move. And still the clouds emptied themselves without pause. May turned into June, then July. And by August, you realized there would be no harvest. In a world where every day depended on that harvest, this was not a delay. It was death foretold. You weren't the only one watching the skies in desperation. From Ireland to Poland, from the Scottish Highlands to the edge of the Alps, peasants whispered the same question through cracked lips. What did we do to deserve this? And unlike the Black Death that would arrive decades later, like a bolt of horror from nowhere, this famine unfolded slowly, painfully, intimately. You watched it sweep over your land like a creeping tide. No single moment screamed catastrophe. It was 1,000 little collapses. First the sheep died, then the pigs. Then the neighbors started talking about eating the seed grain, the precious stock meant for next spring. You shook your head at the idea, horrified. But then your youngest daughter didn't wake up one morning, and you thought maybe, just maybe, a bowl of porridge could have kept her with you another week. You start thinking less about sin and more about survival. By the fall of 1315, rumors started to reach your ears. Not just from your village, but from traders, monks, even a ragged tax collector who hadn't shaved in weeks. Towns were emptying. Travelers were being robbed for crusts of bread. In some places, they said people were digging up old bones to boil for marrow. It sounded impossible, but so was this rain. And then came winter. You've lived through winters before, cold, brutal, and long. But at least there'd been food put aside, barrels of dried peas, salted meat bread hard as stone but still edible. This winter there is no stockpile. You spend nights lying awake, shivering next to your family's stomach, howling louder than the wolves in the woods. You hear your neighbors crying through the thin walls. You don't go to church anymore, not because you've lost faith, but because the priest collapsed during Mass last Sunday and hasn't been seen since. Then your neighbor's boy vanishes. Everyone knows what happened, but no one says it. You find his boot near the edge of the woods, and suddenly, the rumors of cannibalism don't feel like distant nightmares. They feel like a decision waiting to be made. You start to feel like the very earth is turning against you. Fields that once offered bounty now sprout nothing but rot. Your ox dies in the mud, and no one offers to help bury it. They just look at the carcass and quietly sharpen knives. And still it rains. You begin to hate the sound of it, not just for the waterlogged misery it brings, but for what it represents. Powerlessness. The sky, once a symbol of divine protection, now feels like a curse that never ends. You're not alone in this. Across the continent, kings are panicking. The English crown tries to cap food prices, but there's no food to sell. In France, the nobility argues about grain storage while peasants starve in the fields outside their castles. Even the church struggles to explain it. Some blame the Jews. Others blame lepers. Some claim it's divine punishment for sins they can't even name. But none of that matters to you. What matters is your son now weighs less than a sack of flour. What matters is that the village healer has run out of herbs. What matters is that your body, once strong from labor, is now brittle. When you stand too fast, the world spins and your vision flickers black. You are becoming ghost-like in your own life. And this isn't a disease you can't understand. It's not a plague spread by invisible breath or infected rats. This is simple. You are starving. The horror of the famine lies in that simplicity. It's not just the death, it's the way death becomes normal. It loses its ceremony. Burials become shallow pits. Graves are dug too small because the gravedigger has no strength. Children die without names. Parents stop crying. And still, the rain comes down. You wonder often if this will ever end. But you're afraid to hope. Hope feels expensive, dangerous, like a luxury for the foolish. And as the second spring approaches, your heart doesn't lift. It sinks. Because you know you have no seed left to plant, no ox to pull the plow, no strength in your bones to lift a hoe. You look at the sky again and you whisper, "Not yet," but the sky does not answer. When the second spring creeps in, it doesn't feel like renewal. There are no buds on the trees, no joy in the returning sun, just suspicion. Suspicion that the warmth might be a trick, that the dry days will not last, and that the earth itself is too wounded to yield anything ever again. You step outside your hovel bones, aching with each motion, and stare at the land that once fed you. It's bare, soaked, weary, like you. You try to dig anyway, with your bare hands. The soil clings to your fingers like wet bread. Your palms bleed. Still you push the dirt aside because doing something feels better than doing nothing, even when that something is hopeless. By now, half your village is gone. Some have died. Others have simply walked away, leaving behind shoes, blankets, even their children too weak to carry them any farther. You don't ask where they've gone. You assume you'll follow soon enough. The ones who stay don't talk anymore. You all just nod at one another like ghosts still tethered to earth, too tired to haunt anything. The lord of the manor is still alive, though you haven't seen him in weeks. His soldiers once took your grain and taxes. Now they come looking for meat. They confiscate rats, not livestock rats. They say it's for rations, though you know better. You saw one of them chewing a tail in the alley behind the bakery, eyes darting like a trapped dog. There's no justice left. No law that isn't enforced with the edge of a sword. The reeve who once measured wheat for the tithe now carries a club, and he's using it. Still, the church holds Mass. You stagger into the chapel on Sundays, not for faith, but for warmth. A place with walls, a roof that doesn't leak as much. The priest's voice trembles as he speaks Latin you barely understand. He looks smaller every week. His robes hang on his body like curtains. You know he's starving too. One Sunday he speaks in his native tongue instead. Says the famine is a test. Says the meek will inherit the earth. But you can't help but wonder inherit what there's nothing left but mud and bones. It's during one of those long, quiet evenings that you start counting. Not days or meals, but people. You count how many faces you used to see each morning, how many voices once called across the field, how many children laughed at the mill pond. The number shrinks faster than the moon. You remember a boy, Dennis maybe, dirty knees, bright eyes. He used to chase geese with a stick. You haven't seen him in a month. You think he's gone, but no one talks about it. The silence is respectful, or maybe it's just numbness. But not all disappear quietly. One morning you wake to screaming. You rush outside and see two men fighting over a dead goat. Not a live one, a corpse found in the woods, probably sick or half rotten. They're biting and clawing at each other like animals. A woman joins in, swinging a stone. Blood hits the snow like spilled ink. No one stops them. Eventually, someone wins, or at least survives. The others lie still. The goat is gone. That same week, someone digs up a grave. A fresh one. You hear the whispers they cooked the meat with moss and onion grass. They fed it to their baby. And the worst part, you don't even feel horror anymore. You just feel tired. In a nearby town, one you used to walk to on market days, a different kind of suffering unfolds. You hear about it from a traveler gaunt as a skeleton who collapses near your fence. You give him water. He gives you news. He says the mayor is dead. The baker's son hung himself. And that merchants from the cities have started hoarding what little grain remains, selling it at prices only nobles can afford. A bag of oats now costs more than a cow. A pound of flour might buy a daughter. And if you can't pay, too bad. The guards will just push you into the gutter and move on. But famine is not only about food, it breaks the mind too. The villagers begin to change. Eyes become wild. Conversations slur. You notice your neighbor sharpening sticks into spikes and hiding them beneath his thatch. No one trusts anyone. You hold your own breath when walking past strangers, not out of disease, though that will come soon enough, but because you don't want to draw attention. You've seen what desperation does. You've seen the axe handle behind the brewer's door. You've seen the mother who stole a chicken and got stoned to death for it in front of her weeping child. There are no trials anymore, only judgment, delivered cold, fast, and final. The roads are worse. What used to be routes of trade and travel are now corridors of misery. You see more bodies than carts, more rags than wagons. Entire families huddle beneath trees, whispering lullabies to children with swollen bellies and stick-thin limbs. You pass them. You don't stop. You don't have anything to give. But your conscience follows you. You dream of bread. Not warm, buttery loaves, but hard black bricks that used to be considered barely edible. Now you'd kill for one. You wake up chewing your tongue. Your teeth ache. Your breath smells sour like iron and mildew. One day a stranger shows up in the village square preaching. He says the world is ending, that God is cleansing the wicked, that if you join him and repent, you'll be saved. Some follow. Others stone him. You don't do either. You just watch. Because you're too exhausted to believe in anything anymore, especially salvation. There are whispers now of entire regions being abandoned. Forests reclaiming farms. Wolves returning to towns. Inns locked shut. Monasteries emptied. Some say this is worse than any war, because war at least gives you something to fight. This famine gives you only waiting. Waiting for food that never comes. Waiting for rain to stop. Waiting for the next person to vanish. Waiting for death. And yet, somehow, you are still alive. Why you don't know. Maybe because you've stopped thinking, stopped hoping. You just breathe and step forward and breathe again. You are a hollow reed in the wind, bending but not breaking. Not yet. As the second year begins, the land is quiet. Not peaceful, just silent. Birds don't sing. Children don't laugh. Even the dogs have gone still, and you sit outside your door, watching the horizon. And for the first time in months, the sun shines. It feels warm on your skin. Not hot, not dry, but warm. You close your eyes, just for a moment, and pretend it's over. You wake to the soft rustle of wind through the empty trees, and for the briefest moment you forget where you are. The sun is still warm, still hanging low in the sky like a promise. But promises are fragile things now. You open your eyes and reality returns like a weight on your chest. The world hasn't changed. The birds didn't come back overnight. The laughter hasn't returned. The hunger still gnaws. And yet, there's something different today. Not in your belly, it's still hollow. Not in the sky, it's still the same dull blue streaked with cloud, but in the ground itself. It's no longer soaking wet. It's drying. You press your foot into the earth. It sinks only slightly. The mud isn't sucking at your boots. A small miracle. You look at your hands, cracked, stiff, but capable, and you whisper to yourself, maybe this time. That spring across the continent, countless hands repeat the same ritual, fingers clawing through damp soil. Peasants, monks, mothers, boys, each one trying to reclaim some shred of control over their fates. They bury whatever they can find, leftover seeds, scavenged beans, even old grain swept from cellar floors and full of rat droppings. Desperation doesn't wait for purity, and for once the skies listen. The rains ease. Not completely. There are still storms and weeks when it seems the clouds might smother everything again. But this year there are also days of sun. Breezes that don't carry mold. Nights that aren't filled with coughing and quiet sobs. The earth tries to heal, and so do you. But healing is not the same as hope. You still remember the last time you believed in a harvest and how it broke you. This year you plant with caution. You till with care, every step deliberate, every motion slow. Your neighbors do the same. There are fewer of them now. You know their names by heart, not because you're close, but because they are all that's left. You trade with them not goods, no one has any but stories. Soft murmurs of where someone found wild onions or a goose egg in the reeds or how they managed to catch a squirrel. These stories are sustenance now. That summer, the first real summer in what feels like a lifetime, you see something green. Real green. Not moss, not mold, but shoots rising from the ground like trembling fingers reaching for heaven. You kneel beside them and touch the leaves, afraid they'll dissolve. They don't. You cry, not loud, not with gasps, but with a slow, steady stream of tears that fall into the soil. You don't wipe them away. The ground can have them. You don't tell anyone. You don't need to. They see it in your eyes when you walk through the village. The unspoken possibility that maybe, just maybe, this nightmare is loosening its grip. But the famine hasn't gone. Not really. People are still dying. Only now it's the weakest ones left. The ones who barely made it through the second winter. Their bodies simply can't wait for the harvest. Children with sunken cheeks collapse in doorways. Elders drift away in their sleep. Every day still feels like a question, will you see tomorrow? And those who survive are not unscathed. You look in the mirror, what's left of one anyway, and barely recognize the reflection. Your cheeks have sharpened eyes, darker, skin paler. You carry the weight of too many funerals and too little food. And you're not alone. Across Europe, survivors look just like you. Haunted, bent, quiet. The nobility fared better, of course. They had stores. They had walls. But even their larders grew thin. Even their servants died. Even their sons tasted fear for the first time. The famine was no respecter of rank. It seeped through the floorboards of manor halls and into the straw of peasant huts. It whispered the same hunger into every ear. And in its wake, something else begins to change. Faith. Once you believed hunger was a punishment, that God had sent rain and ruin because you sinned. That confession and prayer might ease the skies. But after 2 years of pleading and starving and watching innocence rot in ditches, that belief starts to flicker. Others feel it too. The churches are quieter, not because people have stopped attending, though some have, but because the sermons have lost their fire. Even the priests are thin now. Even the holy men look upward with doubt in their eyes. Some whisper that this isn't divine wrath at all. Some whisper it's something worse, indifference. But you don't speak those thoughts aloud. Not yet. Not to others. Instead, you watch. You listen. And you begin to sense something deeper unraveling, not just crops and bodies, but society itself. In towns, there are riots over moldy bread. In villages, once unthinkable taboos become grim strategies, grave robbing, infanticide, the selling of children. People are beginning to lose not only their lives, but their humanity. And you ask yourself, when the harvest comes, will any of that come back, or are you changed forever? By autumn, the crops have grown. They're not abundant, not like the old days, but they're real. You hold a handful of barley in your palm and feel its weight. It's almost too much to bear. You want to eat it right there, raw chewing until your teeth break, but you know better. You take it to the communal granary, and you weep when the door creaks open and the floor isn't empty. There is food, not enough for a feast, but enough for winter. For the first time in 3 years, you make a stew. Just water onion, 2 handfuls of root vegetables, and a pinch of salt. It's thin. It's plain. But the smell wraps around your heart like a warm blanket. You share it with your neighbor. He brings half a turnip. You eat together in silence, watching the fire crackle. Neither of you says it out loud, but you're both thinking the same thing. You lived. The famine didn't take you. But what it took your children, your strength, your faith, your laughter, those things may never return. Still, you swallow each bite slowly. You savor it. You tell yourself next year things will be better, even if you don't believe it yet. The first snowfall of the 4th winter arrives without ceremony. There is no dread in your chest this time, not like before. The cold still bites, yes, but it no longer feels like the prelude to death. You have food stored, though not much. The roof still leaks, but you've patched it with whatever you could find, animal skins, bark, even woven straw. Your hands are clumsy with chill, but they work. And your belly, it's not full, but it's not empty either. That alone feels like a luxury. The others in the village carry themselves differently now. No one smiles, not really, but they no longer flinch at every sound. People speak again. Not often and not loudly, but the silence has softened. One of the children, yes, one of the few who lived, runs past your hut in the snow laughing. A real laugh, high-pitched and sudden like bird song in the frost. You close your eyes. You listen. You remember that sound. Not everything has returned to life, but something has begun. Still, it's impossible to shake the weight of what you've seen. Even as the famine loosens its grip, the scars it left run deep. You walk through the village and see reminders in every corner, huts abandoned and boarded fields overrun with weeds, graves that no one visits. The famine didn't just claim bodies, it claimed futures. There are fewer marriages now, fewer births. People hesitate before bringing life into a world that showed itself so cruel. And though the hunger has eased, fear hasn't. Everyone knows how quickly the rain can return, how easily the sun can vanish, how fragile the harvest truly is. So when you eat now, you do it carefully, reverently. Bread is sliced with solemnity. Stew is spooned with gratitude. Even the crusts are saved. And somewhere in your mind, the question lingers, what if this happens again? Across the continent, similar fears take root. In England, royal advisors speak in hushed tones about reserves. In France, laws are passed about hoarding grain and regulating markets. Monasteries begin recording rainfall, watching the sky like scholars reading omens. Everyone wants to make sense of what happened, but no one really can. You hear whispers, travelers from the south passing through on their way to cities you'll never see. They say the scholars in Paris and Bologna are debating the famine in their halls. Some blame it on sunspots, others on sin. Still others claim it was just the will of God. The explanations change with the seasons, but the fear remains. And it isn't just fear of weather. The famine exposed something raw, something dangerous. You saw what people became when the food ran out. You saw good men steal, mothers leave children, priests lose faith. You saw neighbors once kind and gentle tie stones to their belts and walk into rivers. What terrified you most wasn't death. It was what people did to avoid it. And now that you've seen it, you can't unsee it. So you build walls around your heart. You keep your pantry hidden. You dig your root cellar deeper. You stop trusting as easily. You survive. But survival costs something. In the years that follow, the land slowly recovers. Fields are cleared again. Oxen return to the roads. Markets reopen. There is even talk of festivals, harvest days with music and drink and roasted meat. You're invited, but you hesitate. You go eventually, but you stand at the edge. You watch others dance, but you don't join in. Your feet don't know how anymore. Still, the music is beautiful. And when someone hands you a cup of ale, real ale, not water stretched with herbs, you take it. You drink. And for a moment, it tastes like memory. But recovery is not uniform. Some regions never return to what they were. In the highlands, entire villages are abandoned, lost to time and weeds. In the boglands, the famine changed the very soil, the water poisoned by rot. People migrate, seeking new places, safer lands. Borders shift. Old roads are forgotten. Even dialects begin to change as scattered survivors rebuild in isolation. You meet strangers now who speak your language with strange accents, wearing clothes you don't recognize. You trade with them. You don't ask where they came from. You don't ask what they've seen. You already know. What's most unexpected is the way time plays tricks. Only a few years have passed, but it feels like an era. Like the world split, and everything before the famine belongs to a different age. You speak of before and after now, as if time itself snapped in two. Before there was abundance, relative anyway. Seasons you could predict. Bread you could bake. Weddings you could celebrate. After is gray, fragile, suspicious of joy. Still life insists on continuing. You find yourself repairing a roof with someone else's son, your own children lost. He doesn't speak much, just hands you nails and holds the ladder. But there's something about that silence that feels like healing. Later you share a meal with him. He eats like someone who remembers hunger, which he does. You both do. But you share anyway. That too is healing. In distant cities, artists begin painting new scenes. Not of saints or kings, but of ordinary people, harvesters, weavers, bakers. As if the famine reminded them who truly keeps the world turning. Even the church changes. Sermons shift tone. Less fire, more comfort. Less fear, more mercy. A quiet revolution shaped by emptiness. And you plant again. The soil is better now. Not because it's richer, but because you know it better. You know its cruelty, its beauty, its betrayal, its forgiveness. You place each seed with reverence, not expectation. You don't hope for a bountiful harvest. You hope for enough. And when the first shoots rise, green and trembling, you no longer whisper prayers. You simply watch. Watch and wait and prepare. Because once you've lived through the famine, you never forget how quickly the world can vanish. But you also never forget how to endure. You become something else. Not just a survivor, but a witness. And that somehow is what gives the famine its meaning. Not the pain, not the loss, but the fact that you were there. And you remember. Winter again. It creeps up with the same quiet menace you remember. But this year, the fear isn't paralyzing. You've made preparations. The cellar holds sacks of grain, a few smoked fish jars of salted turnip, and dried beans lined up like little victories. You've patched the roof with better timber. You even helped your neighbor insulate their walls with sheep wool bought from a distant trader. You've done all you can, and now you wait. There is a strange kind of calm in that. Not comfort, not exactly, but steadiness. You've learned to live in this new rhythm. Hunger no longer comes like a wolf in the night. It pads around you like a familiar stray, always near, always hungry, but not always biting. Still, the scars remain. The bones of the old famine are buried just beneath the surface, both literally and in the memory of everyone left. One evening, as snow drifts outside your window, and your breath curls like smoke, the village priest visits. Not to preach, not to collect tithes, just to sit. He's thinner than last year, but his eyes are brighter. He tells you something you've heard murmured before, that the death toll may have reached 10% of the entire continent. Millions gone. You try to grasp that number. But how could you? You measure loss in the faces you once knew, in the girl who braided your daughter's hair, in the man who always sang while carrying firewood, in the goat that used to butt its head against your knee like a dog. Still, even in this cold season, there are stirrings. A child born, a cart repaired, a well redug. You help where you can, not because you're especially generous, but because helping others helps you remember that you're still human. One day, while mending a fence, a traveler passes through. His cloak is heavy, patched with dozens of fabrics. He speaks little, but he leaves you a gift, a dried apple wrapped in linen. You stare at it for hours before eating it. The taste, sweet with a bite of age, brings tears to your eyes. You savor every fiber. The traveler is gone the next day. You never learn his name. Life continues in fits and starts. You see a woman teaching children how to read by carving letters into clay. You watch an old man forge a new plow blade from salvaged iron. The blacksmith has fewer tools than he used to, but his hands are just as sure. And you begin to realize there's something growing again. Not just in the soil, but in the spirit. The famine took nearly everything. But not everything stayed gone. It's in the faces of those who stay, those who rebuild, those who pass down new knowledge alongside the old. A farmer teaches his grandson how to test soil by smell. A healer shows her niece which bark eases coughing. Wisdom has become portable, now traded like coin. You hear stories of other regions. In Italy, they say a poet is writing verses about love and loss in a language the common people can understand. In the East, new crop rotations are being tested, ways to keep the earth fertile longer. In the North, entire villages have banded together to build grain silos shared by all, guarded by law. Even kings have changed. Slowly. Not out of kindness, but necessity. The famine proved how thin their power really is. A crown cannot grow wheat. A title cannot cure starvation. And so some rulers begin to listen tentatively, suspiciously, but listen nonetheless. Charters are issued. Rights are debated. The peasants, those who survived, are no longer invisible. It isn't justice, not yet. But it's a crack in the wall. One day you're invited to a wedding. It's not grand. No velvet, no roasted pig, no minstrels. Just two young people standing in a field of barley stubble, holding hands, surrounded by everyone who hasn't died. There's music off-key and earnest. Someone has baked bread, coarse but warm. You eat it with trembling hands. And for the first time in years, you feel something close to joy. You don't trust it yet, but you welcome it. Even nature seems to be finding its balance. The storms still come, but they pass more quickly. The rivers rise and fall with the seasons instead of swelling without end. Birds nest in the trees again. You wake to their songs and think for just a moment that you're back in your childhood. But then you see the lines on your hands, the gray in your hair. You are not a child. You are something else now. You are a famine survivor. That term doesn't exist yet. No one calls you that, but you feel it in your bones. A quiet pride mixed with quiet grief. You endured what most did not. You watched the world starve, and somehow, you're still standing. And the famine. It's not a story yet. It's a bruise that hasn't fully faded. But one day it will be a story, and someone will ask you what it was like. You won't know where to begin. Will you start with the rain? With the silence, with the neighbors who disappeared? Or will you speak of the morning you saw a green sprout emerge from the frost-hardened earth? Will you describe the child who laughed in the snow? The apple from the traveler? The bread at the wedding? You don't know, not yet. But you know this, it changed you. It changed everyone. The famine didn't just kill, it revealed. It showed you what lies beneath comfort, beneath faith, beneath civility. It showed you how thin the line is between order and chaos, between neighbor and threat, between human and animal. But it also showed you something else, that even in the deepest hunger, people still try to feed each other, that even in the worst winter, someone still lights a fire, that even when the body breaks, the will to live often does not. You sit by that fire now, warming your hands, watching sparks rise into the dark. And you think, we made it through the hunger. Now let's see what we can build. Spring arrives slowly, as if the earth is reluctant to wake. The ground stays hard longer than usual. The frost clings to the mornings, and the wind feels like it's carrying one last warning. But eventually it comes, a thaw, a breath, a softness in the soil. And when it does, you step outside with a shovel in your hand and resolve in your bones. You've done this before, but this time you do it with more intention. You till not just for survival, but for healing, for restoration. The soil turns easily beneath your blade, dark and rich. You press seeds into the furrows with care, like tucking small children into bed. Not every seed will grow, but some will, and that is enough. Around you, others are doing the same. There's no celebration, no trumpet to announce the return of life. Just quiet labor, just movement, just breath. But it's beautiful in its own way. One morning, a merchant arrives with news the roads are passable again. Bridges have been rebuilt. Bandits have dwindled. There are markets reopening 2 towns over. You haven't thought about markets in years. You remember the old sounds, bargaining voices, clinking coins, the smell of roasting meat. You wonder what it must be like there now. How much the world has changed beyond the borders of your little village. You're not sure you're ready to see it. But part of you is curious. Still, you stay. There's work to do. The fences need mending. The well needs clearing. The herbs you planted last summer have started to peek out, and you must harvest them before rabbits get to them first. This is how the years begin to pass, and with each one the memory of the famine becomes more distant, but never quite gone. You find yourself talking about it more. Not every day, But sometimes when the fire burns low and someone brings out a jug of old ale, the stories emerge. Not in detail, not the worst parts, but enough. You tell the younger ones, those born after. They stare at you with wide eyes, unable to picture a world without bread, without laughter, without birdsong. They don't understand. You don't want them to. You want them to live in the after, to plant seeds and expect them to grow, to eat a full meal without guilt, to walk into winter with only mild concern, and yet you can see the famine in their eyes when they look at you. A question unspoken, how did you survive? You never have an answer. It wasn't strength. It wasn't faith. It wasn't strategy. It was simply endurance and luck. You think often of those who didn't make it, not in a way that drags you down, but in a way that keeps you grounded. You remember them when you kneel in the fields, when you break bread, when you share stories. There is something sacred in remembering. Even now, with life returning, you can still hear echoes if you listen closely. A cold wind that reminds you of the winter when everyone was silent. A thunderstorm that rattles the roof just enough to make your heart tighten. A night when the stew is thin and the old fear creeps in. But you face these moments with steadier hands because you've been through worse. Much worse. By the third year of recovery, your village has grown. Not in numbers yet, but in spirit. People who left are beginning to return. Strangers arrive looking for places to settle. And though you once would have met them with suspicion, you now greet them with something warmer. You know what it means to be lost. You know what it means to be hungry. So you give what you can. You offer them seeds, a place by the fire, a story. Some don't stay. The world is still shifting, but some do. And with them come new ideas, new skills, new hope. One of them shows you how to make a new kind of plow. Another teaches your neighbor how to make soap from ashes and lard. A woman with a distant accent sings lullabies your village has never heard before. And slowly, your world becomes bigger again. You realize that the famine didn't end the world. It just forced it to change. Even the way people speak has shifted. Certain words have disappeared. Others, like ration cellar and mildew, are spoken with reverence or caution. Language itself has become a record of survival. You begin writing things down. Nothing fancy, just notches on wood names in a ledger, recipes, scratched onto scraps of parchment. You want the next generation to have more than just stories. You want them to have guidance. Because the truth is, the famine could return. Maybe not next year, maybe not in your lifetime. But the world is fragile, the balance delicate. So you prepare. Not out of fear, but out of respect. And with each passing season, that preparation becomes a form of love. One evening, you sit with your hands around a warm bowl of soup thicker than any you've had in years. Carrots, leeks, bits of salted pork. The fire crackles nearby. Outside, the wind howls, but it doesn't scare you. You're inside. Fed. Safe. Loved. You watch the steam rise from the bowl and think, this is what survival tastes like. Not just food, but warmth, peace, continuity. The famine tried to break you, but it didn't. It changed you, and now it's part of your story. Not the only part, not even the biggest part, but a chapter you'll carry with you forever. There's a road just outside your village that was once overgrown with brambles and sorrow. You remember walking it during the worst of the famine, stepping over ruts filled with water, past hunched figures too weak to wave. Now, years later, that road hums softly with life again. Footprints, wagon wheels, horse dung, traders and pilgrims and wanderers passing through like blood returning to a long, numbed limb. You walk the road sometimes slowly, without purpose. Not to leave, not to arrive anywhere, just to remember. It winds past the meadows and toward the woods where once you searched for bark, and roots, your stomach howling like a trapped animal. You don't gather those things anymore, but the trees remember, and so do you. A patch of earth near the bend is where you buried your second daughter. You never marked it. It wasn't safe back then. But now you've planted wildflowers there, yellow and blue and stubborn. Every spring they bloom, and you kneel beside them, not to grieve, not anymore, but to speak. You whisper her name. You tell her about the harvest. You tell her how her brother helped mend the roof. You tell her how her favorite song, yes, the one with the clapping, was sung again last week at a wedding. The dead are part of your days now, not haunting, just present. Their absence is woven into everything you do. There's a rhythm to your life again. Mornings spent checking traps or digging in the garden. Afternoons repairing tools or teaching the younger ones how to bind a wound, how to dry herbs, how to tell good grain from bad. You've become the one people come to for advice. You never sought that role, but somehow it found you. You carry the memory of the famine like a hidden scar. Most days it stays quiet, but sometimes it stirs, like when you see a neighbor throw out a half loaf of stale bread. You don't say anything. You just watch. And remember what it was like to gnaw on tree bark and call it dinner. Or when a child refuses porridge and pushes it away, their nose wrinkled. You glance at the child's mother. She meets your eyes and quickly scrapes the porridge back into the bowl. You nod. These moments are fleeting, but they matter, because memory fades, and you've made it your quiet mission to make sure it doesn't disappear entirely. One day a group of traveling friars arrives. They carry parchment ink and an idea they're collecting records, not just of royalty and battles, but of ordinary life. They ask questions. What did you eat during the famine? How did you stay warm? What did you feel when the rain wouldn't stop? You don't know how to answer that last one. Feelings don't translate easily into ink, but you try. You sit with one of them for hours, describing the days when bread cost more than your house, when families vanished in the night, when silence became a second language. He writes quickly, eyes wide. When you finish, he looks at you not with pity, but with awe. That surprises you. You never thought of survival as something awe-worthy, just necessary. But maybe he's right. The friar leaves with your story bundled into his satchel to be taken to some monastery where scribes will copy it onto vellum and bind it into a book. You picture someone reading it 100 years from now, eyebrows furrowed, unable to imagine a world so cruel. You hope they never have to. Later that year, your village hosts its first harvest festival since before the famine. It's modest. No great bounty, no towers of bread or fountains of wine. But there's music, laughter, children with flower crowns, a dance that stumbles through rhythm and rhyme but lands eventually in joy. You don't dance. Your knees ache too much. But you clap, you sing, and when someone passes you a slice of sweet cake, a rare treat, you take it and savor every crumb, not just for the flavor, but for what it means. That night, as the fire dies down, and you walk home under stars that seem a little brighter than they used to, you find yourself thinking not of the famine, but of the future. What will come next? Will the rains return someday? Will the earth betray you again? Maybe, but maybe not. And maybe, just maybe, you're not as afraid of it as you used to be. Because now you know that even in the darkest years, something remains. A spark, a will, a thread of life that refuses to break. And it's not just in you, it's in the people who stayed, the children who grew up in the ruins, the strangers who brought songs and seeds from far away, the friars who wrote your memories down, the baker who now measures flour like treasure, the healer who discovered that moss from the northern trees can soothe wounds, the blacksmith who makes tools not just to sell, but to share. This is what survival has become, not just enduring, but rebuilding, retelling, reimagining. The famine is still with you, yes, but it no longer defines you. You're more than what you lost. You're what you kept, and what you're building now. The years pass not quickly, but steadily, like a cart drawn by an old ox creaking forward day by day, never rushing, never stopping. And you find that life, despite everything, has a way of continuing, of layering over the old pain with new purpose. You wake to birdsong now, real birdsong. Not the echoes of memory, but the living trill of wings in the trees outside your window. For the first time in a long while, you rise not from hunger or cold, but from habit. Your body aches in new ways, not from starvation, but from work. Honest, repetitive, exhausting work, and you are grateful for it. Today you're heading to the fields early. Not to plant, those days are past for your hands, but to teach. A group of young villagers waits by the fence, each with a bundle of tools too large for their frames. They're gangly, awkward, full of questions. Most were born after the famine. They've only heard the stories, and even those have softened with time. You walk the rows with them, pointing out where to dig, how deep to sow, what weeds to watch for. One boy asks if it's true that people once ate dirt to stay alive. You pause. Then you tell him yes. Yes, they did. You watch the disbelief in his eyes as he looks down at the soil, rich, dark, and full of worms, and you wonder what it's like to not know fear in your belly. You hope he never has to. Later, you rest under the shade of the old elm tree that somehow survived everything. Its trunk is thicker now, and the moss at its base is soft. A girl sits beside you, maybe 10 years old, clutching a wooden bowl filled with berries. She offers you some. You take only a few. That instinct, always saving, always rationing, never quite left you. She eats the rest, giggling when the juice stains her chin. And in that moment, you feel it again. Not quite joy, not quite peace, but something just as precious. Continuity. The famine did not erase the future. It only made it harder to reach. And now you're here, living in it. There's a meeting in the village square that evening. Not a council, not a crisis, just a gathering. People bring stools, bread news from travelers. Someone plays a flute. Another strums a harp. The music is clumsy, but heartfelt. No one cares if it's perfect. A young man stands and recites a poem about the famine. You close your eyes and listen. His words are sharp, full of fire, and strangely beautiful. He wasn't alive during the worst of it, but he's heard the stories. He speaks them like incantations, drawing power from memory. And when he finishes, the square is quiet for a long moment. Then someone starts clapping, then another, then everyone. It's not applause for entertainment. It's something else. Recognition. You return home under the stars, your lantern swinging gently from its hook. The night is clear, the air cool, and in that silence you hear something you haven't noticed before. Nothing. No moaning wind. No coughs through paper-thin walls. No sound of someone burying a body behind a cottage. Just silence. And it's not heavy. It's gentle. Your home, once a hollow shell with a leaking roof, and no food has changed. The roof is patched. The walls are insulated. There's a jar of honey in the corner, and herbs drying by the window. A neighbor carved you a new spoon last year. You still use it. You sit by the fire and stare into the flames, letting your thoughts wander. You think of the people you've lost. You think of the woman who used to braid wildflowers into her hair, the man who used to hum while carrying buckets, the child who always asked too many questions. Gone. But not forgotten. You speak their names sometimes, not to mourn, but to keep them alive. Memory is all you can give them now, and that memory has weight. It anchors you, grounds you, makes you careful with your blessings, makes you attentive to the shifts in the wind, the soil, the sky. You keep an eye on the weather, always. Rain still makes your heart beat faster. Drought still knots your gut. But these reactions aren't fear anymore. They're instinct. Wisdom, maybe. You've learned how to live in uncertainty. That may be your greatest gift to the ones who come after. Not crops or coins, but knowledge. The knowledge that suffering passes, that famine ends, that silence lifts, and that life, even after everything, can be beautiful again. You look around your home, and for the first time in a long time, you realize you have more than you need. Not much more, but more. You could give some of it away. You will. The next morning, you bring bread to the family who just arrived from a village further east. They lost everything in a fire. Their eyes are wide, frightened, hollow. You recognize that look. You sit with them. You don't ask questions. You just break the loaf in half and offer it wordlessly. The father takes it, hands trembling. The children devour their share in seconds. The mother whispers thank you over and over. You nod. You don't say, I understand. You don't need to. She sees it in your eyes. The famine made you different, but it didn't make you cruel. And that may be the greatest miracle of all. The smell of bread baking now fills the air more often. Thick, crusty loaves, some with herbs or grains folded in. You pause every time you pass the baker's home, letting the scent wash over you, like a memory you're not quite ready to let go of. It's more than just hunger now. It's reverence. You used to dream of this smell in your sleep during the famine, imagining it drifting through the air like a ghost. Now it's real. And yet, it still feels like a miracle every single time. There are other signs of recovery, too. Children run through the fields again, shouting nonsense games, chasing each other with sticks they call swords. You watch them from your porch and feel something unclench in your chest. Their joy is loud, unrestrained, and free. They weren't there for the worst of it. And you hope they never know what it meant to starve so deeply you forgot your own name. You spend more time telling stories these days, not just of the famine, but of everything before, during, after. The children gather in the evenings, sitting cross-legged in the dirt, waiting for you to speak. You tell them about what the village once looked like, about how the river ran differently, how the forest used to come closer to the fields. You describe the old market before it crumbled, the blacksmith who could split a horseshoe with his bare hands, the woman who used to sing lullabies while grinding flour. They ask questions, too many sometimes, interrupting, giggling, pushing each other. But you don't mind. Their curiosity is part of the healing. It tells you they're far enough from the famine to feel safe asking. Sometimes, though, one of them will ask, "What was the worst part?" And you'll pause. Every time. Because the worst part wasn't the hunger. It was watching people disappear. Not just die, though death was constant, but vanish from themselves. You saw it in the eyes of a man who stopped speaking, in a mother who left her baby in the snow and walked away, in neighbors who forgot how to laugh. You want to protect these children from that part of the story, but you know you can't. So you tell it gently, truthfully, quietly. You say, "There were days we forgot what hope felt like," and they go quiet, suddenly understanding that the stories they laugh at are rooted in something deeper. Still, you don't want them to live in shadow. You want them to carry the truth, but not the weight. So you always end the stories with something good. A seed saved, a neighbor's hand, a fire that stayed lit, a green sprout that rose in the middle of a frozen field. Because those things happen too. You've started carving again. Nothing fancy. Just figures from memory people mostly. Your wife's profile, your son holding a spade, the cow that survived all 3 winters. You carve them into wood, place them on the mantel. Sometimes the children ask who they are. You tell them their names, what they did, what they loved. You don't talk about how they died. That part belongs to you. There's talk in the village now about rebuilding the mill. The old one near the river collapsed in the 2nd year of the famine. For years it was nothing but a skeleton, timbers jutting out like broken ribs, moss eating the wheel. But someone's drawn up plans. A group is organizing volunteers. You go to the meeting. Not because you have strength to lift beams anymore, but because you remember how important the mill was, how its turning meant full bellies, how its silence meant death. They ask you questions. You answer what you can. And when they begin construction, you walk down there every morning to watch. Sometimes you carry nails. Sometimes you bring broth. Sometimes you just sit and listen to the creak of hammers and laughter. Laughter. It returns like a shy visitor. Not all at once. Not everywhere. But enough. You think of the time during the famine when no one spoke for days. You remember the sound of wind scraping along empty streets, of distant sobs of creaking wood, and nothing else. Now there are songs again. Bad ones mostly. Off-key. Invented mid-verse. But they're sung. And that means more than anyone realizes. One evening a stranger arrives in the village. Dressed well. Boots without holes. Clean hands. He introduces himself as a scholar sent from a university to learn how the famine affected rural communities. He carries scrolls, books, ink, and an endless appetite for stories. You let him sit with you by the fire. He asks questions. You answer. At first it's simple: how many people died, what crops failed, when did the rain stop? But then he asks, what did it feel like, and you go quiet. Because how do you describe a hunger so deep it replaced your name? How do you explain the silence that came when the baker stopped baking, when the church stopped ringing, when the children stopped crying till you try. You describe it in fragments, the sound of rain that wouldn't end, the way your fingers shook when planting seed that might never grow, the smell of rot clinging to your clothes, the way time warped days, stretched into years and years, became a blur of mud, death, and waiting. He writes it down, every word. And when he thanks you, you realize something: this story matters. Not just to you, but to the world that wasn't there. You are a witness now, a keeper of memory, a guardian of what was lost and what managed somehow to survive. You watch the scholar walk away, his bag heavier with your words, and you feel lighter. The village has a rhythm again. It's not the same as it was before the famine. It never could be, but it's a rhythm nonetheless. Morning bells chime faintly from the chapel. Smoke curls from chimneys by noon. The hammering of carpenters, the chatter at the well, the occasional bark of a dog. Familiar. Human. You wake with the sun now, not from fear, but from habit. The body remembers old routines. You stretch slowly, joints popping like old doors, and begin your day. Not with desperation, but with purpose. Your hands still ache in the cold. Your knees still argue with the damp. But these are the aches of living. You'll take them. There's a new family in the village. Young, full of fire. You helped them build their home from timbers salvaged from the ruins of the old granary. They've planted apple trees. You walk past those trees some mornings and nod at the husband as he weeds the base. He smiles every time, a quiet thanks. He doesn't know what this land has seen, but he feels it somehow in the soil. People are planting trees again. That might be the clearest sign of healing yet. You find yourself teaching more and more. Not formally, there's no school here, but through stories, demonstrations, quiet instruction. A girl shows you her basket of mushrooms. You gently separate the edible from the poisonous. A boy brings you a carved spoon, proud of the curve. You help him smooth the edge. These small exchanges anchor the days. There are still reminders of the past. Bones unearthed from fields. Broken tools rusting in the forest. Graves without names. But they're no longer symbols of despair. They've become monuments. Markers of where you were and how far you've come. And sometimes people come from outside the village. Traders. Pilgrims. Once a tattered soldier passed through eyes hollow, mumbling about wars in distant lands. They always ask the same thing. Is there food here you always share, even if it's little, especially if it's little? Because you remember what it was like to arrive with nothing to ask, to hope. The community is stronger now. Not larger, not wealthier, but stronger. There's an unspoken code: no one starves alone. No one is turned away without at least a crust, a blanket, a dry place to sit. You sit by the fire one night, sipping a weak cider pressed from last year's apples. A boy sits beside you, the same one who once brought you that misshapen spoon. He's older now, voice deeper, eyes clearer. He asks, did it ever feel like it was never going to end? You stare into the flames. Yes, you say. He waits for more. You let the silence linger before adding, but that didn't stop us from waking up each day. He nods. He understands in the way young people do. Not fully, but enough. He asks you to tell the story again, the one about the green sprout breaking through frost. You tell it, again. You always do, And every time you do, it feels more real, more alive, like you're passing something sacred. You wonder sometimes how many others survived. Other villages, other towns, other wanderers on other roads. You imagine them scattered across the continent, all of you carrying the same memories, like ashes in your pocket. Some of them are probably telling stories too. Some of them are carving, planting, teaching. The famine may have isolated you, but survival connects you. There are small celebrations now, name days, births, even the rebuilding of an old barn. Nothing elaborate. A loaf shared, a song sung, a fire lit. But they're meaningful. They remind you that life isn't just about enduring, it's about acknowledging that you made it and choosing joy where you can. You find yourself smiling more often. The lines around your eyes deepen. People call you wise now. You don't feel wise, just old, just full of memories. One day, a girl brings you a letter from a town you've never visited. It's from a friar who read your story in one of the university archives. He thanks you, says your words helped him understand something his teachers never could. He says he read them aloud to an entire hall of students, that some of them cried. You read it 3 times. Then you fold it and tuck it into your coat, close to your heart. You never expected your story to travel further than your voice could carry. But now it lives in ink, in paper, in minds you'll never meet. That feels like victory. The famine tried to erase you, but you left a mark instead. You don't sleep much anymore. Old age has crept in quietly. But on good nights, you sit by the hearth and listen to the wind, not with fear, but with familiarity. You know its sound. You know what it brings, and you're no longer afraid. You close your eyes and hear the voices of those long gone. They aren't mournful. They aren't calling. They're just there, part of you, etched into your bones like the lines on your hands. You think of the seasons ahead. Spring, summer, another harvest, another winter. Each one a gift, not a guarantee. You've stopped counting how many winters you've survived, but you remember the one that tried to take everything, and how you lit a fire anyway. The day begins with a chill, but not the kind that warns of disaster, just the crispness of early morning dew on the grass, mist curling low over the fields. You breathe it in slowly, leaning against your walking stick, watching the sun rise like a cautious guest, returning after a long absence. It's planting season again. You're too old now to work the soil yourself, but you still rise with the workers, still make your way down to the edge of the fields to offer advice, to inspect rows, to press a bit of dirt between your fingers and nod approvingly. The earth smells rich, like promise, like it wants to feed you again. You sit beneath the same elm tree where you've spent so many seasons watching the world come and go. The bark is gnarled, now split from lightning years ago, but it's alive, stubborn, familiar. You run your palm along the trunk and remember the days when it was barely taller than your shoulder. That's how time moves now. In trees, in faces, in the subtle shifting of generations. The boy who once asked you what it felt like to starve is now a father. His child toddles between rows of vegetables, laughing as butterflies swarm overhead. The child's laugh makes your chest ache in a good way. It's a sound you once believed had gone extinct. The famine seems like a story now, a tale too dark to be real. And sometimes even you struggle to believe it happened the way it did. but then the memories return. In dreams, in smells, in sounds. The snap of dry branches on a quiet night still makes your body go still. The sight of a cloudless summer sky makes you check the dryness of the soil. The sound of a child crying for food still lingers longer than it should. You live with those echoes. They don't control you anymore, but they walk beside you. The healer's apprentice comes to see you now and then. She brings herbs, wraps your knees, listens carefully to your descriptions of old remedies. You teach her what you can. The bitter root that stops bleeding. The fungus that numbs pain. The moss that draws infection. She writes it all down. She's clever, sharp-eyed, careful. You trust her with what you know, because what you know shouldn't die with you. That's the legacy now, not wealth, not land, not titles, but memory. Wisdom passed hand to hand, mouth to ear, root to wound. One evening, the villagers gather around the chapel to celebrate a naming. A baby born just 2 weeks ago is to be given her name under the stars. You join them wrapped in your cloak, walking slowly but determined. There's bread, cheese, a little wine, a flute, a drum, laughter warm and wide. As the stars appear, the mother stands and speaks the name aloud. It's a good name, strong, a name you recognize from before. And suddenly, without warning, you cry. Not loudly, not from sadness, but from relief. The world is growing again. A few days later, you find yourself sorting through the small box beneath your bed. It holds the things you've saved. A strip of cloth from your daughter's dress. A rusted spoon. A bit of rope once used to tie a satchel that carried seed. Worthless, perhaps. But to you, they are everything. You think for a moment about burying them, letting them return to the earth. But no, you leave them. You want someone to find them someday, to wonder what they were, to ask. Maybe they'll ask the right questions. Maybe they'll remember. The scholar who once recorded your story returns briefly. He's older now. His cloak is newer, his eyes just as curious. He brings you a book. Inside are pages filled with names, places, accounts. Yours is among them. You flip through slowly. Your voice, your memories, now ink and parchment. You thank him. He nods, says nothing more. Before he leaves, he asks, "Do you think it could happen again?" You pause, then answer honestly. "Yes, of course. But next time we'll be ready sooner." He nods, and you both sit for a long time watching the sun set over the village. That night, as you lie in bed, you stare at the rafters above you, fingers folded over your chest. The wind outside rattles the shutters. You feel no fear. You feel old, tired, but not undone. You've become part of the land now. A story people pass along. A name spoken beside the fire. A figure seen beneath the elm, still watching the horizon, like a sentry guarding memory. And maybe that's enough. You close your eyes not because you must, but because you can. And the night, for once, is kind. The mornings grow longer now, and with them comes a new warmth, not just in the sun, but in your bones. Not the ache of labor or the chill of hunger, but the heat of contentment, of a life earned and lived. The kind of warmth that makes you pause and close your eyes without flinching. You sit outside most days watching life happen. There's a young couple who've taken over the corner plot by the stream. The same patch of land where nothing would grow during the famine, where the soil turned sour from too much rain and too many buried sorrows. Now it's green. Rows of beans, stalks of corn, patches of cabbage so large you laugh the first time you see them. They call it a miracle. You know better. It's not a miracle. It's patience. It's care. It's time. And it's the quiet will of the earth to try again even after everything. You sit and watch the couple in the field, their sleeves rolled high, their arms streaked with sweat and dirt, and it fills you with something close to pride. You've seen that land at its worst. Now you see it blooming. People stop to talk to you more now. They ask questions. They bring food. They call you elder now, a word heavy with meaning. You don't correct them. You've earned it. There are still ceremonies. A wedding last week, a baptism the week before, a planting feast coming soon. These moments still feel fragile, as if laughter might scare them off. But they stay. And each time you find yourself more willing to join in. Maybe not to dance, but to smile, to clap along, to sing a few verses when the mood is right. Sometimes they ask you to tell the story again. You sit by the fire the children gathered at your feet, the adults quietly listening behind them. You start from the beginning. The rain, the rot, the hunger, the silence. You tell them what you saw, what you did, what you lost. You don't cry anymore when you speak of it. Your voice doesn't crack. The words come more easily. Because it's no longer pain, it's memory. And memory, when shared, becomes strength. You tell them about the green sprout in the frost, about the traveler with the apple, about the stew made from almost nothing, about how one winter the snow fell so thick it buried the doors, and yet somehow the village still breathed come spring. You tell them not to forget, because forgetting is how it starts again. They listen. Some lean forward. Some grip their mother's hand. A few glance toward the darkness, half imagining the famine as a shadow waiting just outside the fire's glow. That's good. A little fear is healthy. But then you smile. You tell them how the rain stopped, how the seeds took root, how bread returned, how laughter did too. You end with this: we're still here. That's what matters. Afterwards, someone always brings you a bowl of stew. Someone always offers to walk you home. You let them. Not because you need help, but because accepting kindness is its own kind of strength. At home, you hang your coat by the door, the same peg you've used for decades. The coat's thinner now, patched and restitched, but it still holds its shape. Just like you. You sit down, take off your boots, rub your aching feet, and look around. The walls of your cottage hold so many years now, so many seasons. You run your hand over the table's worn edge, smooth from use. You trace the carvings on the window frame, small marks, notches that once measured children's heights. They stop low. You stare at them for a moment, then nod. Not with sadness, but with love. You walk outside again, lantern in hand, and stand beneath the night sky. Stars glitter above like grains of salt scattered on velvet. You tilt your head back. Breathe deeply. The air is sweet with life. You think of how during the famine the sky felt like a weight low, wet, heavy. Now it stretches wide, endless open. A shooting star streaks across the black. You don't wish on it. You don't need to. Your wishes already came true in the quietest, smallest ways. The neighbor's baby lived. The wheat sprouted. The songs returned. you're still here. You lower your head, turn back toward your door, and step inside. On the table sits a bundle of dried herbs, a gift from the healer's apprentice. You crush one between your fingers. The scent, lavender sharp and soothing, rises like a memory of summer. You sleep well that night, not like before when sleep came as escape, but real sleep, safe sleep, the kind you once feared you'd never know again. The first frost of the season arrives quietly. You wake to windows kissed with ice, to the faint shimmer of white over rooftops and fields. It doesn't bring dread anymore, just a reminder, a memory wrapped in silver. You pull your cloak tighter and step outside, your boots crunching softly against the stiff earth. Frost no longer feels like the beginning of the end. It feels like the beginning of rest. The village has prepared well. Root cellars are full. Herbs hang in bundles. Barrels of grain, casks of cider, baskets of preserved fruits, all tucked away like squirrels storing acorns before sleep. There are no panicked whispers this year. No desperate trading. No feverish counting of crusts. Just readiness. You walk through the village and nod at the people who pass. A girl is gathering firewood with her younger brother. A man mends a fence while humming a tune you recognize from years ago. Two women patch wool cloaks on a bench in front of the bakery, which already smells of rye. Even in winter's grip, there is warmth here. Not just from fire, but from one another. That's what the famine taught. In the end, no one survives alone. You think of the dark years and how solitude devoured just as surely as hunger. Now, when someone is sick, the whole village knows by sundown. Soup appears at their door. Herbs are delivered. Children are taken in by neighbors for the night. Not out of obligation, but instinct. Because when everything else failed, kindness remained. You reach the far edge of the village where the cemetery lies. Snow dusts the headstones. Many of them still bear no names, just rough stones, markers for the forgotten. You walk slowly among them, your hand brushing one as you pass. This was your brother's. That was your friend's. This one, you never found out her name. You stop at your daughter's spot. The flowers have long since crumbled, but the earth is undisturbed. You kneel, not easily, not without a creak in the knees, and rest your hand on the soil. You don't speak aloud. You never have. But your thoughts settle like snow. You survived for her. You survive still. You stand after a moment and take one last look at the horizon. The sun is low, casting gold through the bare branches. The wind picks up swirling flakes around your feet. You turn and make your way home. Inside, the fire waits already lit by your neighbor's son. He's taken to checking in on you now. Brings you firewood. Eats half your soup. Tells you stories he hears from traveling merchants. You pretend to grumble, but you never send him away. He reminds you of yourself in a way. Restless. Hungry for something deeper than food. You sit down beside the fire and take out the little pouch you keep hidden in the cupboard. Inside are dried beans, famine beans. They were never planted, never eaten, just kept. A reminder. You pour them into your hand. They're small, wrinkled, hard as stone, but still whole, still capable of growing. You think about giving them away, maybe to the young couple by the stream, or to the healer's apprentice. But not yet. Not this year. You're not ready to part with them. You tell yourself it's for safekeeping. But deep down you know they're your tether, your proof that what once tried to break you was survived. The fire crackles beside you. Outside, the frost thickens. but inside everything is still. Your chair creaks, you sip broth, you listen to the wood shift and sigh, and your heart, once ragged with grief, beats steady. Later that night you dream. You are walking through the village as it was mid-famine, gray and broken. But the houses are full of light. The dead walk beside the living. The bread smells sweet. Rain falls, but it doesn't drown. It nourishes. You hear laughter. You hear names spoken again. You wake with tears on your cheeks. But you're smiling. Not because it wasn't real, but because it was. And still, somehow, you made it here. Winter tightens around the village like a slow breath held in the lungs. Days shrink. Nights stretch. The air sharpens, biting at noses and fingertips, turning breath into steam and footsteps into crunching rhythms over hardened soil. But this winter, like the one before, it feels different. Survivable. Predictable. You still rise early even if your bones protest more than they used to. Your walks are slower, your path shorter, but you move anyway because motion even now feels like defiance. You have tea in the mornings now, steeped with herbs from the healer's apprentice. It helps with the aches, and the bitterness is oddly comforting. You sit near the hearth with your hands around the cup, letting the heat sink into your knuckles. You glance around your home, the shelves lined with dried goods, the basket of firewood near the door, the cured meat hanging near the ceiling. It's not abundance, but it's enough. Enough to get through the winter. Enough to not feel afraid. Some nights you host quiet gatherings. Nothing formal. Just a few neighbors who bring bread, dried fruit, salted cheese. You trade stories. You laugh, really laugh. The kind that bends your shoulders and brings tears to your eyes. Someone always sings, usually off-key, usually too loud. But no one minds. The boy who once brought you stew when your joints swelled now plays a hand drum. He's taller now, lean and wiry, with a voice just beginning to drop. You smile when he calls you Old Oak. You suppose you've been called worse. These evenings aren't about celebration. They're about closeness, warmth, proof that you made it through. Sometimes in the quiet moments between stories, someone brings up the famine again. Not in fear anymore, but in reflection. You hear others beginning to tell parts of the story as if it's their own. Even those who weren't alive then speak of it with a kind of inherited reverence. You correct the details when necessary, but mostly you let them speak. Let them take ownership of the story. That's how it stays alive. You still go to the chapel each week, not for confession, not even for faith exactly, but for silence. A place to sit and breathe beneath high rafters, to remember those who were lost without needing to speak their names aloud. The priest is younger now. He doesn't preach fire or damnation. He speaks of endurance, of community, of mercy. It suits the times better. You sometimes help him with the records, dates, births, deaths, baptisms. You notice how many new names there are now. How many families have returned or begun anew. There are more children than you expected. More pregnancies announced each spring. It feels like the village has decided to live again, loudly, messily, beautifully. And yet, there are still the hard days. When someone falls ill, when the weather takes a sudden turn, when food spoils unexpectedly. Those days don't scare you the way they used to, but they remind you. The famine never really left. It lives in the habits we formed, the extra blanket folded near the fire, the piece of bread never thrown away, the cellar always stocked for just in case. One day, the healer's apprentice comes with a notebook. She's been collecting recipes, remedies, advice. She asks if you'll add yours. You write slowly, your fingers stiff, your eyes squinting. But you do it. Every page is a seed for someone else, a safeguard for a future you'll never see but care about anyway. That night, she reads your notes aloud to a group of children. They giggle at your handwriting. They gasp at the ingredients. One little boy makes a face when she reads boiled bark for fever. You laugh louder than anyone. You still visit the graveyard sometimes. You don't cry there anymore. You sit. You remember. You tell stories aloud if no one is near. You speak to the empty air. You tell them what's growing in the field now, who married who, what song was sung last week, how many babies were born since autumn. You keep them up to date. They deserve to know. A scholar returns to the village one day, a different one this time. Young, wide-eyed, carrying a satchel full of ink and questions. He wants to understand the human cost, not the death tolls, not the rainfall charts, but the feelings. The day-to-day moments, the choices that defined survival. You speak with him for hours. You tell him about the first time you boiled roots you didn't recognize, and how you were afraid it might kill you, but you were hungrier than you were scared. You tell him about the woman who sang lullabies in the middle of winter to a child who never woke up. You tell him about the time someone found a single egg in a pile of straw and the entire village cheered. He listens. He weeps. He thanks you. And you think not for the first time that maybe the famine wasn't just a wound. Maybe it was also a lesson. One the world keeps needing to learn. As the scholar leaves, he gives you something, his own copy of the compiled histories. You open it that evening by firelight and find your name, your words, your story. And beneath it, in a neat hand, his memory nourished us. You touch the page gently, as if it were skin. You smile. Then you close the book and rest your hands on the table. The fire burns steady beside you. Outside, snow begins to fall again, soft and slow. And inside, everything is warm. Snow blankets the village in silence. The kind of hush that makes even the dogs lie still, their ears twitching, but unmoving, their breath rising in little clouds above the straw. You sit at your window, wrapped in wool, watching the world turn white. The trees outside are bare, but not dead, just sleeping. Everything is resting now, you included. You don't go out much these days, not in the snow. Your joints ache more than they used to, and the cold bites a little deeper. But you're not trapped. You're not afraid. You remember winters that brought dread with every flake. This isn't that. This is peace. Your home smells of dried herbs, wax, and old wood. The fire crackles gently. The bread is wrapped in linen on the table. You have enough. You are warm. You are not alone. Children come to visit often now. They bring questions more than bread these days. They sit at your feet or tug at your sleeves. They want to hear stories, and not just about the famine anymore, about everything. What it was like before. How people lived. What they believed. What changed. You tell them. You talk of seasons and stars, of weddings and songs, of the time the whole village gathered to build a bridge that washed out a week later and still laughed about it, of how once during the worst rain a cow wandered into the chapel and stood like a statue behind the altar through the entire Mass. They love that one. Sometimes you wonder if they realize how much you remember. how many faces you carry, how many names still whisper through your thoughts. You don't speak them all. Some memories are folded too deeply to share. Some belong only to the silence. But others, you give away freely, like seeds. That's what it feels like now, scattering seeds. You've become the village's soil, not its fire, not its force, its foundation. They bring you news, too. The road to the city has reopened after a landslide. A new family moved in from the southern hills. The smith's daughter is apprenticing with the tanner now. People are planting more flax this year, and the wheat taller than ever. You nod, soaking it in. You don't need to see everything anymore to feel it. You feel it in the way the wind carries smoke, in the way the chapel bells ring clear again, in the way your porch steps creak beneath young feet. One morning you wake to a village preparing a festival. It's not a holiday tied to any saint or season, just something new. A remembrance, they call it. To honor what came before and what endured. You weren't the one who suggested it, but you were the reason. They make a feast from the oldest recipes you taught them. Flatbread, porridge, roasted turnip sweetened with honey. They gather near the old elm tree, the one that outlived the famine and still drops leaves in the same crooked circle. Someone hangs a lantern from its branches. Others add little wooden charms, each carved with a name or symbol. They invite you to speak. You do. You stand with help, your cane steady in your hand, your voice scratchy but strong. You don't give a speech. You just say, "We lived, and we remembered." That's enough. And it is. They sing afterward, a slow, rolling tune that no one quite knows the words to, but everyone joins in. A hum, a rhythm, a comfort. You sit beside the fire watching them sway in the lamplight, thinking of all the winters past and how long it took to get here. Back at home, you sit by your window one last time. The sky is deep with stars. No clouds, no threat. Just quiet. You sip the last of your tea. The air tastes faintly of frost. You close your eyes, and you listen. Not for danger, not for hunger, but for breath, for heartbeat, for life, for the quiet, enduring song of a world that tried to die and didn't. And when sleep comes, it comes softly, not as an escape, but as a blessing. You're still here. Through every storm, every bitter season, every ache in your body, and every hunger that tried to silence you, you endured. And now in this stillness, in this gentle dark, you are wrapped not in fear, but in memory. You've walked with ghosts and broken bread with survivors. You've watched sprouts rise from ruined soil, laughter return to silent streets, and stories rise like steam from warm soup bowls. The famine may have taken years, but it didn't take you. Not the real you, the part of you that remembers. The part of you that plants again anyway. You don't need to fight anymore. You don't need to explain. You don't even need to move. Just breathe. Just rest. Let the rhythm of the seasons rock you. Let the fire's gentle crackle soothe your thoughts. Let the weight of the past settle into the ground where it belongs. The story is told now. It's safe in others' hands. You've done your part. You've fed not only the body, but the heart, the mind, the future. That matters. So exhale. Let the snow fall softly outside your window. Let the candle burn just a little lower. Let your hands grow still and sleep. You are not alone. You never were. You made it. You can rest now.